Medieval warfare wasn't just knights in shining armor. A real medieval army was a mix of specialists: heavy cavalry, tough infantry, missile troops, scouts, and siege fighters, each doing a very specific job. In the next 22 minutes, we're breaking down the main warrior types you'd actually find on European battlefields, what they carried, how they fought, and why they mattered when things got serious. Number 1. Heavy cavalry. In medieval Europe, the biggest status plus firepower package was the armored rider, the knight, and the broader category called men-at-arms. People mix those up, so here's the clean version. Knight is a social title tied to land, obligation, and a whole culture of reputation. Man-at-arms is a military label, a trained, well-equipped professional who can fight in heavy armor, whether he's a knight or not. On the battlefield, they were the shock unit when conditions were right. The classic move is the couched lance charge, a long lance tucked under the arm, horse at speed, aiming to smash a section of the enemy line and turn it into a mess. But it's not a guaranteed win button. Horses don't love charging into a forest of spear points, muddy ground can kill momentum, and a disciplined infantry line can make cavalry look very ordinary. That's why, especially in the later Middle Ages, armored elites often fought dismounted. If you're expecting a fight in tight terrain, or you're defending a position, getting off the horse can be the smarter play. Gear-wise, early medieval heavy fighters are mostly male: a chain shirt, a helmet, and a shield. As the centuries roll on, armor becomes a mix of mail and plate pieces, and by the 1400s, the richest men-at-arms might wear full plate harness. Plate wasn't some clunky metal coffin. It's shaped to the body so weight spreads out, and trained fighters could move surprisingly well. The real problem was heat, fatigue, and getting knocked down in a crowd where 5 people can pile on you. Weapons also tell you what the job really was. Knights loved swords because they're versatile and they look noble. But on real battlefields, you also see maces, axes, and warhammers, things that don't need a perfect edge to ruin someone's day. A lot of armored combat is about targeting weak spots: under the arms, around the visor, behind the knee, and anywhere straps and joints create gaps. That's why you hear about techniques like half-swording, where a fighter grips the sword blade with a gauntleted hand to aim the point like a short spear. Another detail people miss: a knight rarely fought alone. Medieval armies were built around retinues. A captain shows up with his household men, their squires, spare horses, and helpers. Some records even count strength by lances, meaning one man-at-arms plus the small team that supports him. It's basically a mini-unit, not a lone hero. And there's a money side to all of this. Heavy gear and war horses are expensive, so a captured man-at-arms could be worth more alive than dead. Ransom culture is one reason medieval battles sometimes look less lethal among elites than people assume, at least compared to what happened to ordinary infantry, when a line broke and panic hit. Once you understand heavy cavalry as a mix of social status, professional skill, and expensive logistics, the next pieces of the medieval army make more sense, because somebody has to keep that whole system running under stress. Number 2. Squires and sergeants. If knights are the headline act, squires and sergeants are the practical backbone that keeps the show from falling apart. A squire isn't just a kid polishing armor. In wartime, a squire can be a capable fighter who's already spent years riding, training, and learning how campaigns actually work. His daily job is support, and it's more serious than it sounds. Managing spare weapons, bringing a fresh lance, handling the extra horse, keeping the armor from falling apart, and dragging his lord out of trouble if things go sideways. On a medieval battlefield, little problems become big problems fast. Broken straps, lost weapons, tired horses. So the people who solve those problems quietly are a big deal. Some squires were on the path to knighthood, but plenty stayed as professional assistants and fighters, especially if money or birth didn't open the title door. Sergeants are another misunderstood label. It doesn't mean a modern NCO rank. It usually means a trained, paid soldier below the knightly social level. They could be mounted or on foot. Mounted sergeants often act like lighter cavalry, scouting, raiding, chasing, and protecting the flanks. Foot sergeants are the dependable fighters holding gates, guarding bridges, and forming the steady line in battles where not everyone can afford elite gear. Their armor might be a padded jack, a mail shirt if they're lucky, a solid helmet, and maybe some plate pieces later on. They're the career soldiers of a world where many men only serve for short periods. This also ties into how medieval armies are actually raised. A king might call feudal obligations, hire mercenaries, pay contracted men-at-arms, and demand militia service from towns, all at the same time. The result is a mixed force where professionals and part-timers stand side by side. In that mix, sergeants and experienced squires are often the glue. They know how to march, how to keep order, how to set watch, how to react to sudden trouble, and how to not fall apart when morale gets shaky. When a commander needs someone to hold a risky spot, escort prisoners, or lead a fast night raid, these are the people who get tapped. And once you zoom out from the elite circle and their support teams, you hit the biggest category by sheer numbers. The infantry that does the hard miles and holds the line. Number 3. Spearmen and shield walls. The spear is the most common medieval battlefield weapon for one simple reason. It's an amazing deal. Cheap to make, easy to teach, and terrifying in a group. In the early Middle Ages, lots of European fighting is built around the shield wall. Rows of men with big shields overlapping, spears poking forward, and everyone trying to keep the line from bending or breaking. It's not fancy, but it's effective. The real skill is discipline. A shield wall doesn't need every individual to be a genius fighter. It needs people who can stand close, keep formation, and push together. If one man panics and steps back, he opens a gap, and gaps are where a line dies. Spears also control space. A sword is great in close range, but a spear tells the enemy, "You can't step here." And that's powerful on a crowded battlefield. Shields matter too, and not just as protection. A shield is a moving barrier you can slam into someone to off-balance them, create a little pocket of space, or protect your neighbor for half a second while he recovers. As medieval warfare evolves, you still see spears everywhere, but you also see the long spear become a whole identity in some places. Pike formations. Pikes are basically spears that got seriously taller, meant to stop cavalry and dominate open ground. The stereotype is that medieval infantry is always helpless against knights, but late medieval history is full of infantry proving otherwise when they're trained, organized, and led well. Town militias in some regions drilled regularly, guilds sponsored equipment, and communities took pride in how they fought. On the flip side, you also had levies, men called up for limited service, often undertrained, carrying whatever they own, not exactly thrilled to be there. That gap in quality is huge. A solid spear line with decent armor and strong leadership can be a wall. A shaky levy line can collapse the moment it feels pressure. Another thing people forget is that infantry isn't automatically poor. Some foot soldiers are quite well equipped, especially in wealthy towns or under strong rulers who standardize gear. You might see good helmets, sturdy padded coats, and organized units with shared banners. When you picture medieval battles, try to imagine the sound and feel. A line of spear points, shields knocking, men shouting to keep rhythm, and leaders watching for the first crack. Once that crack happens, everything changes, because medieval battles are often decided less by perfect killing blows and more by morale. Who holds, who breaks, who runs. And when armor improves and shields aren't always enough, infantry starts leaning harder into weapons that can handle armored opponents and mounted threats at the same time. Number 4, polearms and line breakers. This is where medieval weapon design gets really, okay, we're solving a specific problem now. A polearm is a long shaft with a nasty head, blades, spikes, hooks, or a mix. Bills, halberds, glaives, volleys, and the famous poleaxe all show up across Europe in different flavors. The point is, reach plus leverage. Against an armored opponent, a simple sword slash may not do much unless you hit a gap. A polearm lets you strike with more force, jab with a spike, yank with a hook, or just bully someone with the length of the weapon. Against cavalry, polearms are a nightmare if used well. You can hook a rider, smack a horse, or force cavalry to hesitate because getting too close means getting dragged down. In late medieval battles, you often see dismounted men-at-arms fighting alongside polearm infantry. That combination is brutal in a very practical way. Armored men hold the line and don't easily get shoved around, while polearm troops reach past them, pull enemies out of shape, and punish anyone who steps into the wrong spot. The poleaxe deserves special mention because it's basically a close-range anti-armor toolkit. It can have an axe blade for chopping, a hammer face for blunt impact, and a spike for punching into gaps, all on one weapon you can control in tight spaces. This matches what armored combat actually looks like up close. Not elegant dueling, but grappling, shoving, tripping, and trying to control the other person's balance. If you knock a man down in armor and keep pressure on him, he's in serious trouble. Not because he literally can't move, but because getting up while someone is pushing you, hooking you, or stabbing at openings is incredibly hard. Polearms also fit medieval logistics. They're cheaper than equipping everyone like a knight, and they can be produced in large numbers, especially when towns and rulers start organizing mass infantry. That's one reason you see infantry become more professional later on. You can train groups to handle long weapons, keep spacing, and move like a unit. And once you have infantry that can stand firm, the next big lever in medieval warfare is distance, because making the other side suffer before they even reach you is always a good plan. Number 5. Archers and longbowmen. Archers are the medieval battlefield's pressure cooker. They make moving across open ground feel like walking into bad weather you can't escape. In Europe, bows come in different styles, but the big celebrity is the English and Welsh longbow tradition. A longbow is simple in shape, wood and string, but warbows could be very powerful, and using them well takes years of practice. That's the key. Longbow armies don't appear overnight. You need a culture that trains archery regularly, because building the strength and skill for heavy drawbows is a long-term project. That's why some medieval governments pushed archery practice through local musters and social pressure. On the battlefield, archers don't usually aim for one perfect shot like in movies. They shoot in volume. The goal is to fill the air with arrows, force the enemy to slow down, mess with cohesion, and punish dense formations. Even when the best plate armor can resist many arrow hits, not everyone wears the best armor. Horses are vulnerable, less armored troops are vulnerable, and chaotic movement creates openings. Arrows can also hit the face, the hands, the back of the legs, places that aren't always perfectly protected, especially early on. And archers can shape the whole fight just by existing. If one side has a strong archery line, the other side may feel forced to attack quickly, which can push them into bad terrain or rushed decisions. Archers need protection though, because once enemies close the distance, archers are in a rough spot. So commanders use terrain, defensive positions, and supporting troops to keep archers alive. You'll see archers behind stakes, behind ditches, on slopes, or shielded by men-at-arms. Also, medieval archers weren't always unarmored peasants. Some wore helmets and decent armor, especially later, and many carried sidearms like knives, short swords, or small axes. They're not looking to fight like knights, but they can defend themselves if things get messy. There's also a pure logistics angle that's surprisingly important. Arrows. Campaigns burn through arrows fast, so having carts of ammunition and the supply chain to keep archers shooting is a huge advantage. When it works, archers don't just cause casualties. They break rhythm. They turn an organized advance into a stressful stop-start slog. And as soon as you talk about missile troops in medieval Europe, you have to talk about the bow's mechanical cousin that changes who can become a deadly shooter. Number 6. Crossbowmen and early gunners. The crossbow is basically medieval cheat code for training time. It's still a skill, but the learning curve can be shorter than a heavy warbow because the weapon stores energy mechanically. A crossbowman can span the bow with a belt hook, a lever, or a cranking device like a windlass, depending on the bow's power. The trade-off is speed. Heavy crossbows can hit hard, but they reload slower, so crossbowmen fight in a rhythm. Step out, shoot, step back, reload, repeat. That's where the pavis comes in, the big portable shield you see in late medieval art, sometimes nearly as tall as a person. A crossbowman or his helper plants it, creating a safe little pocket to reload behind. Put a bunch of crossbowmen together with pavises and supporting infantry, and you get a steady, controlled missile platform that's especially nasty in sieges and set-piece fights. Crossbow bolts are shorter and stiffer than arrows, and the whole system can be very accurate, which is great when you're firing from walls, through gaps, or at specific targets. Crossbowmen were also common as hired professionals in some regions, especially around wealthy city-states and Mediterranean warfare, where money and contracts shaped armies as much as feudal obligation did. Now slide into the late Middle Ages, and you start seeing more gunpowder on European battlefields. Handgunners and artillery crews. Early handguns are slow, smoky, loud, and not always reliable, but they have two big advantages: intimidation and improvement over time. Even when accuracy is limited, a volley of gunfire can rattle morale, and the weapons get better generation by generation. Handgunners often work best alongside polearms and pikes because they need protection while they reload, just like crossbows do. And then there's artillery. Cannons don't instantly erase castles the moment they appear, but over time they change siege warfare in a huge way. Walls that worked fine against ladders and arrows start looking less comfortable when heavy shot can batter stone. That shift creates new military specialists: gunners, powder handlers, engineers who build platforms and calculate firing angles, and commanders who plan sieges around artillery instead of pure starvation and ladders. The medieval battlefield starts to feel like a mix of old and new. Armored men-at-arms still matter, polearms still dominate close range, but more and more, ranged tech and siege tech are reshaping what safe even means. And outside the big set battles, there's another category that quietly decides a lot of wars: the fast movers who make the campaign unbearable. Number 7. Light troops and scouts. Medieval war isn't only about one big dramatic battle. A lot of it is marching, scouting, raiding, and trying to force the other side into a mistake. That's where light troops come in. Light infantry might be javelin throwers, slingers in some regions, archers with lighter bows, or simply nimble fighters with spears and small shields. Their job is skirmishing, harass the enemy, pull them out of formation, screen the army's movement, and keep pressure on the flanks. They're also the eyes and ears. If you don't know where the enemy is, you can walk into an ambush, lose your supply wagons, or get trapped against a river. Light cavalry plays the same game at higher speed. In different parts of medieval Europe, you see different names and styles, but the role stays familiar. Scouting ahead, raiding villages and supply points, chasing down stragglers, and exploiting chaos when the enemy line starts to wobble. They're not usually built to crash head-on into a spear wall. They're built to show up fast, hit something vulnerable, and vanish before heavy troops can respond. This ties into a very medieval strategy that's easy to underestimate: destroying the enemy's resources. Raids could burn crops, steal livestock, and pressure towns into paying or switching sides. It's ugly, but it's a core tool in medieval campaigns because controlling food and money often matters more than winning one battle. When you hear about armies living off the land, this is the practical meaning: taking supplies, sometimes by purchase, often by force, and using mobile troops to make that possible. Light troops also become decisive after a battle breaks. Once one side starts running, the pursuit is where casualties and captures often pile up. A disciplined chase can turn a retreat into a complete collapse, while a sloppy chase lets the enemy regroup and fight again next month. So these fast units may not get the glory, but they frequently decide whether a victory is just a moment or a turning point. And there's one more category that has its own rhythm and its own specialist skill set, because medieval Europe spent an incredible amount of time fighting not in open fields, but around walls. Number 8. Siege troops and fortress fighters. If open battles are the highlight reel, sieges are the actual season. Medieval Europe is packed with fortified towns, castles, and strongpoints, and wars often revolve around who controls them. That creates warrior types that don't fit the charge and clash picture. Garrison troops are a category of their own, soldiers trained to defend walls, hold gates, and survive long stretches of tension, boredom, and sudden violence. They might be men-at-arms, sergeants, militia, or hired professionals, but their skill is defensive discipline. Watch routines, quick reaction to alarms, and knowing the fortress like a map in their head. On the attacker side, you have pioneers and engineers, the people digging trenches, building earthworks, constructing wooden towers, making covered shelters that let soldiers approach the walls, and setting up siege engines. It's sweaty, dangerous work because defenders are constantly trying to interrupt it with arrows, crossbow bolts, stones, and quick sorties. Then you have sappers and miners who do the nerve-wracking underground job, digging tunnels to undermine a wall or tower so it collapses. Defenders answer with countermining, listening for digging their own tunnels, and fighting in cramped spaces where there's no room to swing big weapons. Siege crews for trebuchets and later cannons are specialists too. They're not random peasants pulling ropes. They're teams who know timing, tension, measurement, and how to keep a massive machine working day after day. When a breach finally opens, a different kind of fighter takes over, the assault party. These are the men carrying ladders, rushing through narrow gaps, and fighting in tight spaces where a polearm might be awkward, and where shields, short spears, axes, and close control weapons suddenly matter a lot. Commanders sometimes offered rewards for the first men over the wall, which tells you how risky it was. Someone had to go first into the worst angle with the least cover. And even when a siege doesn't end with a dramatic storming, the day-to-day pressure is constant. Patrols to stop supplies slipping in, skirmishes over outworks, night watches, and sudden fires set to burn siege equipment. On top of that, medieval warfare in many regions includes rivers and coasts, which brings in another warrior type people forget, the shipfighter. On galleys and smaller craft, combat often means missiles at close range and then boarding actions, so crews value shields, helmets, short weapons, and the ability to fight on unstable footing in a cramped space. Whether on a wall, in a trench, or on a deck, siege and fortress fighting rewards coordination and nerve more than flashy individual skill, because the environment itself is doing half the fighting. Tight angles, limited room, brutal fatigue, and the constant feeling that danger can show up out of nowhere the moment someone shouts an alarm.